Okay, everyone, how is our day going? I'm sure we are doing very well. All thanks to God. Okay, back to our lectures. Last time we finished with our literature review, and we are to go into chapter 3 today. Research methodology. Introduction. Usually, research methodology comes up in chapter 3 of the research project. Its purpose is to provide a detailed explanation on the procedures to be used in carrying out the research. That is, the master plan to be followed in the conduct of the study. Usually, this chapter takes the form of the following outline. Before we go into this, let's just explain the introduction well. Research methodology this is talking about the methods you're going to use in running your research. We've talked about the introduction, we've talked about the literature review, going deep into the history of your topic, and talking about everything about the project you're going to work on. Now, this methodology now is simply telling us the methods you're going to take. That's the practical work you're going to do now. Not literature review anymore. The practical work you're going to do in the research. It takes up chapter 3. The purpose is to provide a detailed explanation of the procedures. That's the procedures you're going to use to run the project, the practical aspect of it. Okay, it takes the form of the following outline. You have the introduction, research design or method, population of the study, sample and sampling techniques or methods, instruments for data collection, procedure for administration of instruments, data analysis procedure, research design method. Okay, we'll take it one after the other. After opening the chapter with an explanation of what it sets out to do using the outline above, next is to explain the research design, which is also known as research method. That's the exact method you're going to use, the step-by-step method you're going to use. That is, what kind of research is it? Having known the various types of research. Remember, we talked about the various types of research in chapter 3. If it is a survey or a case study, for instance, say so and describe it. First, generally, and then with particular references to your work. So depending on the kind of research you're running, you have to state the exact type of research you're running. And then when you state it, you describe it generally, and then you go specific to the exact thing you're doing. This becomes important in view of the fact that the rest part of the chapter depends on the nature of your research. So the rest of the chapter is all about the particular type of research you are doing, which would have been clearly described here. Okay. Take the outline for outline. We talked first about the introduction, telling us the type of research you're working on, explaining it further, and then going specific to the exact one you're doing. Then the next one is the population of the study. Population of the study. Let's take it. Number 2, population. Population of the study. The study's population sets the limit within which the research finding will be applicable. The limit, that's the particular population you're going to work with. Every other population doesn't matter. The limit, that's just that particular area you're going to work with. Population is a technical term used in research to describe that group. Which may be of people, animals, or things from which the researcher intends to draw his study sample. Not just people, animals, it can even be plants, it can be microorganisms, anything at all that you want to work on, from which the researcher intends to draw his study sample. That's where you're going to get your samples to begin to work on. In other words, population refers to all the members or elements of that particular group of people, animals, or things in a defined area. It has to be a particular area. Like I said, it can also be plants. You may be working with plants. For those of you working on botany topics, it can be microorganisms, any group at all. It simply refers to the totality of the research subjects in a given research situation. To state the population of a study very clearly, therefore, there is the need to have factual figures of the number constituting the study's population, as this will have a direct implication for the sample and the sampling process. So you need figures on the number constituting the population. You need factual figures. Right. The next one is sample and sampling techniques or methods. Sample or sampling techniques. Sampling techniques or methods. Sampling techniques or methods. Once the study's population had been adequately and appropriately determined under 3.2 above, that's under population of the study. You stated the population you're going to work with. So once it has been adequately and appropriately determined, it becomes easy to draw out a sample therefore. Once you've determined the particular population you're going to work on, it will now be easier for you to get samples, to go there and get samples that you're going to do your practicals on. Sampling research refers to that group of the study's population from which necessary data for its conduct will be obtained. Remember, you're going to work with data. So the data depends on the results you get from your testing. So you need to do your sampling very well. When you do your sampling research, you'll be able to get your data. So sampling research refers to that group of the study's population from which necessary data for its conduct to be obtained. In other words, it represents a smaller group of the elements or members drawn through some definite procedure from a specified population. You get each sample, a smaller group, you go back, you get another sample. As you get your samples and work on them, you will be able to record your data. It is the sample that will be studied and not the population. So you go into the population. When you get to the population is already stated out. You go there and then you begin to get your different samples. So it's actually the sample that you're studying. When you collect your sample, you go back to the lab or wherever you want to work on it. and you work on that particular sample. So it is the sample that will be studied and not the population, while the outcomes resulting from the data obtained from the sample can be generalized for the population. So when you get your sample, you work on it. You, depending on the period you have for the work, you go back, you get another set of sample, you work on it, and then from the data, the results you get from the different samples, the data you get from them, that is what is being generalized for the entire population. Remember, you're not working on the entire population, you're only picking samples from the population. So the results you get from these samples you have picked is what you can use to make a generalization for the population. This is because some even believe that such outcomes of a carefully planned and well executed sample stand to be more accurate than those from a population. Of course, the ones you get from samples will be more detailed, more accurate from that of the entire general population. That is, Durotolu 2001 found justification for this position in the statement that, okay, we are going to get Durotolu's statement. He says, the studying of a complete population involves a huge and unwieldy organization, so that most of errors that will normally occur here cannot be controlled easily. Yes, it cannot be controlled easily because it's an entire population. It's not specific to a particular sample. Also, using a complete population may not satisfy the particular needs of individual disciplines. In a sample, it is possible to estimate the margin of error and decide whether or not the results are sufficiently accurate. As for the sampling techniques or procedure, they depend largely on the type or method of sampling adopted. Each sampling technique depends on the type of sampling that you adopt, which in turn is a function of the extent to which generalizations can be made about a particular population. Let's take that again. As for the sampling techniques or procedure, they depend largely on the type or method of sampling adopted. Each sampling has a particular method. So depending on the method you are adopting, which in turn is a function of the extent to which generalizations can be made about a particular population. So they all determine the extent to which you can generalize. Some of the common types of sampling method or techniques include, so we have different types of sampling methods. It depends on the sampling method you choose. Let's look into the different types of sampling methods. We have random sampling, systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling, purposive sampling. That we have just these 5, and then we are going to take them one after the other. Random, systematic, stratified, cluster, and purposive. We'll first of all take the random sampling. Let's call it A. Okay. Types of sampling methods. We have A, random sampling. Random sampling. As can be deduced from its name, this type of sampling guarantees every member of the population equal opportunity or chance of being chosen, to the extent that the choice of any one member does not at all affect that of another. Its procedure is that the population being sampled is numbered, so that random numbers are picked from the random number table. So each Each sample has equal probability of being chosen because you're picking them at random. At random. Sample A has an equal probability of being chosen, and just like sample B, sample C, as they're being taken at random. Now, it can be done by tossing the coin, throwing the die, balloting with the use of slip or paper, or even by the use of computer. So you can take any of those methods to do your random sampling. You pick the samples at random. The next one is systematic sampling. Systematic sampling. Systematic sampling seeks to offset inherent inadequacies associated with the random sampling, particularly as it relates to area of coverage. Random sampling is not biased. It's picked at random. It's not biased at all. But we also have some inadequacies there, which systematic sampling can also offset. Now, the procedure of systematic sampling is also simple and straightforward, just like random sampling. After choosing any particular member or element of the population, make a decision on what interval to use in making the remaining choice subsequently. It is taken at regular intervals. You make a choice on the interval to use. Take, for instance, you want to space it out in tens. You take the first sample, the next sample will be the 10th one, the next will be the 20th, the next will be the 30th, just the 30th position. That's taking it in intervals of 10-10. You can choose 15-15, whichever one you decide. But the intervals you're going to take is going to be fixed. You don't just take from one, you take an interval of 10, and the next one you take interval of 15. If you're doing intervals of 10, it has to be fixed. It has to be a regular one. It has to continue as 10, 10, 10. If it is 15, it has to continue as 15, 15, 15. So you make a decision on the interval you want to use. In taking the decision, it is necessary to ensure that the intervals are regular. Just like I've said, they are fixed, they are regular. You maintain a particular interval. That's why it's systematic. Noting also that the interval size is directly linked with the sample size. Although this method ensures a wider coverage, its technique of the first pick determining the subsequent ones runs short of the assumption of independence, which affords every member equal chance. That is, the practice of using the first number picked to determine what subsequent ones will be picked denies some members of the group their right of being picked as others. Yes, it all depends on where you start your first picking. The very first number, it depends on where you start the first number. So the next one falls dependent on where the first one has been taken. Alright, the next is stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling. Okay. This type of sampling method seeks to recognize the various strata of a study's population, especially in heterogeneous population. In this case, the population is divided into strata. That's kind of subgroups, levels. They are divided into strata using some criteria before a decision on the number of members to be chosen from each of the strata is taken. Note, however, that the strata do not contribute an equal number for the sample, but a number in proportion to the expected or known sizes of the strata in a population. Thus, the method serves best when the population is not homogeneous. Is better in heterogeneous populations than in homogeneous populations, as in the population of a city which contains different age groups, different social and economic circumstances, racial areas, gender types. Yes, so it's better used in heterogeneous populations, since you're going to be dealing with strata. In a population, you have different age groups in a population. You can pick them according to age groups. You have different social and economic circumstances. You have racial, gender types, and all. So it's in such a population, it will be better used there. However, it does not require that the sampling fraction should be the same within each stratum. Though where there is a uniform sampling fraction, it is referred to as proportionate stratified sampling. This means that the sample size from a stratum is proportional to the population size of the stratum. So the size of the sample has to be proportional to the entire size of the population. Better still, that the total sample size is allocated between the strata by proportionate allocation. If the sampling fractions vary, then the sample is referred to as disproportionate stratified sample. So in summary, stratified random sampling is just division into, let's just call it subgroups. You have the groups, you have the subgroups, different strata. When they are divided into such, then you collect your samples based on the different strata. That is why it's preferable for heterogeneous population, where you can easily get the strata. Okay, we have the next one, cluster sampling. Cluster sampling. Cluster sampling. From the word cluster, you can already imagine what it is. This is a sampling technique. When you talk about cluster, things clustering, coming together in different groups. This is a sample technique which involves dividing a population into groups or clusters. You divide them into various groups or clusters, from which a sample of the cluster is drawn. So when you divide them into various groups, then in each group, in each cluster, you pick a sample. From the selected sample clusters, it is expected that all members of each cluster are either selected, or a sample of individual constituents is again drawn from each of the clusters. Okay. In using this sample technique, there is the need to ensure that all the constituent parts of the clusters are adequately represented. So all the groups, all the parts of the different groups must be adequately represented. This means that the heterogeneity of the cluster's units must be ensured, while ensuring also that the characteristics of the clusters themselves are similar. This becomes particularly important in the event that all members of each selected cluster need to be included in the final sample. Like we said, when they are selected, they are put into various clusters. Each member must be included. Each one has to be represented. The technique helps greatly to reduce the field costs of conducting a research which covers a wide subject area. Now, in the stratified sampling, the units are selected. You select some units from all groups. But in the cluster sampling, all units of groups are selected. Okay, so we go over to purposive sampling. Purposive sampling. That's the last one. Purposive sampling. This is a technique in which the researcher, based on his knowledge and understanding of the population, handpicks certain groups or individuals for their relevance to the subject of investigation. Here, the researcher relies on his own judgment, on his own understanding, his own knowledge. It's not like random sampling where you just pick anything, just go around and pick randomly, or in stratified or cluster or the rest of them. This purposive sampling, the researcher, you depend on your own knowledge and understanding of the population based on your own judgment. You handpick certain groups of individuals for their relevance to the study of investigation. You're picking them because when you look at them, they have some characteristics that you need in your sample. You already know them. You have a very wide understanding of them. You know that they are relevant in the particular for your sample. So you, based on your own judgment, you just go and handpick them. Considering that the method was determined primarily by a particular purpose, which the researcher has in mind, it can be considered then as a judgmental form of sampling. You say it's a judgmental form of sampling because it's based on your own judgment. You're not picking them, or like in the in random sampling, you go and pick randomly. Systemic, you just put your intervals and you pick whichever one falls within the interval, you pick it up. It's a different thing in purposive sampling. It's based on your own judgment. That's why it's called a judgmental form of sampling. You handpick because you already know about it. Its major advantage lies in the fact that it gives a great possibility for the participation of those considered very crucial to data collection in a given study. So that's the major advantage. So looking at all these samples, you as a researcher, you know the one that will be relevant, that is the one that you feel that is much better, is best for you for your work, and then you go about working on it. Remember, we have random, systemic, stratified, cluster, and purposive sampling. All right. The next one is instruments for data collection. Instruments for data collection. That is number 4. We've talked about introduction, population of the study, sampling techniques. Then instruments. Instruments for data collection. You know, your instruments, the instrument you're going to use depends on the kind of data, the kind of sample you're going to pick. There are a number of instruments that could be used for collecting data in a research situation. The type or types of instruments used, however, depends on the nature of the research and the type of data to be collected. So the instruments you're going to use will depend on the data you're collecting, will depend on your sampling, Somebody sampling animals will need to use different instruments with somebody that is working on plants, somebody that is working with human beings, somebody that is working with organisms. So depending on the nature of your work, your instruments will be determined by the nature of your research work and the type of data you're expecting to collect. Usually, a combination of instruments is used in collecting data for a particular research project. This is with a view of offsetting inherent limitations in one with the other. So you combine so that in case you have a limitation with one, the other one can cover up for it. Durotolu 2001 underscored the essence of data collection instruments to the conduct of research investigation in the following statement. Let's take Durotolu's statement. He says, any meaningful research requires pertinent data, since such data are necessary for finding solutions to the research problems. In essence, the strength and viability of any research will be determined by the type of data collected and the mode of collecting them. The strength of any research, the viability of any research, it all depends on the type of data you have collected. Your data really says a lot. It really means a lot. The type of data you've collected and the means through which you collected them. The process of data collection in a research demands careful planning by the researcher. If you pick the wrong sample, you will get the wrong result. If you don't collect your data properly, it is going to affect your result. Remember, at the end, the result you're going to get at the end will determine the conclusion you're going to get. And all this comes from the data. So you really need to be very careful in getting your data. The process of data collection demands careful planning by the researcher. It means a lot, your data collection. He has to decide on the type of data he should collect, the place where such data may be collected, and then the instruments that will be appropriate for the exercise. You decide on the type of data. You know the type of data you're going to collect first, and then that will determine the place where you will look for the data. If you're working on aquatic organisms, you don't go to the forest. You go to the water where they live. So you're knowing, deciding the type, knowing the type of data you're going to collect. You will now look for the right place where you collect them. You look for the right place. You're working on human beings, you don't go digging the soil. When you dig the soil, you find soil organisms inside there. You don't find human beings living inside there, except you want to look for dead bodies that have been buried in the soil. So you look for the right place, and then getting the right place too will now determine the instruments that you're going to use. One, type of data, the right place to get the data, and then the instruments that will be appropriate for that exercise. Some of the common instruments used for data gathering in research include questionnaire. Questionnaire is an instrument depending on your topic you're working on, and then now you're going to work with people. If the instrument you're using is questionnaire, that is to say you're going to work with people. It is not animals that will fill your questionnaire for you. It is not plants that will fill your questionnaire. It is not microorganisms that will fill it. It is human beings. That means you're going to work with different groups of human beings. The second instrument is interview. You interview people. You can do a one-on-one interview. You interview people and get your data from them. Observation. You observe. This can also work with plants, animals, different living things, even people. Observation. 4. Documentary sources. You have different sources from you. You can work with journals and the rest to get your to document for your documentary sources. Okay, let's look at the instruments one after the other. Instruments for data gathering. Okay, the first one is questionnaire. Questionnaire. This is a common data gathering instrument among researchers. Yes, it's very common. A lot of researchers work with questionnaire. They distribute to different groups of people. You go to schools, workplaces, markets, different people, depending on your topic, remember. They distribute to them and they fill the questionnaire for you. So it's a very common data gathering instrument. It consists of set questions for submission to a number of persons, otherwise known as respondents, used for collecting relevant data in a study. So that is the name questionnaire. It derives its name from questions, because it is questions that you set and you give to those people to answer for you. It could even be something you're working on. You have a sample. You're working on a particular foodstuff. You can give it to different people to taste. One person's taste will be different from another person's taste. So as they taste, they fill the form, they fill the question, they answer the questions for you, depending on their own personal, the way they look, see the taste. It could be any other sample. They look at it and they tell you how they feel about the sample. That's one good thing about questionnaire. You have different views. As you're working with different people, you're working with people that have different views about a particular thing. And then you gather everything, your data. That is how you gather all your data. So it consists of set questions for submission to a number of persons, otherwise known as respondents. The people you're sending the questions to are respondents. They're going to respond to you. They're going to respond. They're going to answer your questions. And you get your data based on the various answers you get from them. Used for collecting various relevant data in a study. It sets out to gather factual information. Factual information in an inquiry form through which respondents answer or respond to statements in writing. Take note of this. It has to be factual information. So when you're sending out your questionnaire, you send it out to the right group of people. You don't send out your questionnaire to people who are not knowledgeable. People who will just close their eyes and write yes, no, tick anything they like in your questionnaire. You have to send it to the right group of people that will fill and give you factual information. That will really help you. You don't go to a nursery school and spread to little children and tell them to write things that adults should have written for you. They will just paint it for you, strike everything, and then you go with it. So you need to give it to the right people so that you'll be able to get factual information. They answer the questions and they respond to statements in writing. It's always in paper, so they have to write for you. Questionnaire can be categorized as closed, structured, and open, unstructured. Either it is closed or structured, or it is open or unstructured. When structured or closed, respondents are provided with alternative answers from which they will select one or more answers depending on the way the question was structured. You give them alternatives from which they select. On the other hand, they are unstructured or open-ended when they require free responses in the respondent's words and style. This type is designed to permit free responses from participants rather than those limited to specific alternatives. It is common to find both structured and unstructured design in one questionnaire, each with its set objective. Okay, a questionnaire, it's either closed, either you call it closed or you call it structured, whereby you give your respondents alternatives, that is, different answers that they can pick from. A, B, C, D, E. You pick from alternatives. You have a fixed thing where you can pick from. Either you pick A or B or C or D or E. So it is closed. That's why it's called closed. You can't go beyond that A to E alternatives. But when it is open or unstructured, in that case, the respondent is free to answer your questions in his own words, in his own style, however he wants to answer the questions. He's not restricted to a particular set of alternatives. He's free to write out of his own style. He's free to write from his own words, whatever he wants to write for you. Now, some questionnaires come just as closed all through. Some of them come as open all through. Some also can come as both closed and open. You have some questions that are structured within the questionnaire, and you also have some set of questions that are also unstructured within the same questionnaire. So it depends on you, the researcher, whichever is your choice, whether you want to make it all closed or you want to make it all open or you want to make it both closed and open. It's your choice. All right. So this is about questionnaire. Next class we'll go into, okay, let's quickly finish up with the qualities of a good questionnaire, so that next class we can start off with interview. We can start off with interview as the second instrument. All right. Qualities of a good questionnaire. Qualities of a good questionnaire. A good research questionnaire is expected to have certain characteristics, some of which include the following. 1. It should have an introductory letter to state explicitly the objectives and significance of the research and instrument. You have to introduce it, an introductory letter to state your objectives. You have your research, you should have, remember we've talked about objectives of your research. So you have to state the objectives and the significance of the research. Okay? So the first one is an introductory letter. Let's call this I. Introductory letter. The next one, items must be as short as possible and only long enough to get the essential data. Items must be as short as possible and only long enough to get the essential data. Okay? Short items, long enough for the essential data. That is to say, you don't have to start wasting so much time writing unnecessary things. Just get the essential data stated. Its appearance should be attractive by being neatly arranged and clearly duplicated or printed. Attractive appearance. That it will even encourage people to fill it and fill it for you. The appearance has to be attractive. If it's attractive, it will encourage people to collect it from you and not trash it, but fill it and fill it well and return it to you. Each item of the questionnaire should deal with a single idea and worded as simply as clearly as possible. Each item should deal with a single idea and worded as simply and clearly as possible. Should be simple and clear. Make it easy for your respondents. Simple and clear. To make the work easy for them, and they will do it the way you want them to do it. 5. The questions must be objective and not suggest any lead as to the responses desired. The questions must be objective and not suggest any lead as to the responses desired. Okay? Allow them to write it from their own, based on their own thinking. Questions must be objective. Objective questions. The questions must be set up in such a way as to start from the general to the more specific. General to more specific. All right, so that is it. We are going to round it up here. All these will enable your respondents to organize their own thinking logically and more objectively. All right, so the lecture is going to be ended here. The next time we'll meet, we'll go into the next one, which is interview. Thank you very much and have a wonderful